Welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Ball. My co-host is Justin Baker. He is here. I know you're all pumped about that. And Justin, welcome in.
Why wouldn't everybody be pumped about that? I love it.
Why not? Why not? Well, the regular season is, we're like past the 10. We're about around that 10 game mark, right? Like I think a lot of teams are at game 9, maybe game 8 for a couple teams, but we're starting to get a little bit of a feel for how this looks. I know it's only 10 games, but if we measure everything in like 10 game chunks, which, kind of it's an eighth of the season, we've already seen some very interesting trends. And so with that, we wanted to spend some time on some teams that are absolutely exceeding our expectations thus far. So we'll talk about 4 teams, the Red Wings, Montreal Canadiens, the Vancouver Canucks, and the Anaheim Ducks. And we're just going to talk about, hey, what's happening? Why are they doing so well? Why didn't we see this coming? Is this for real, or are they just teasing us a little bit? So we'll dive into that. We're also going to, with Pierre Dorion, GM of the Ottawa Senators, being let go, we're going to jump into who we think is also on the hot seat, because I think he would have been a part of that conversation, and his seat has officially caught fire and disintegrated. So he's no longer the GM of Ottawa. We'll jump into head coaches, maybe some GMs, but particular head coaches, and then we'll wrap this thing up. So, Justin, with these 4 teams, we're going to start with the Red Wings. I figured we're going to start with the team that you know the best. I know pretty darn well because we both live here in Michigan, and I figured we'd start with Detroit. But as far as the first 10 games of the season, how heavily do you weigh these games? Like, do you feel like the first 10 games are different than the 40 through 50?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a reason, we've always said that you can, what's the term, by American Thanksgiving, right? You can either play yourself out of a playoff spot or you can play yourself in. Now, I don't necessarily buy into play yourself into a playoff spot, but I definitely think you can play yourself out of a playoff spot by American Thanksgiving, right? So, we're 3 weeks away from that. So I think these first 10 games, I usually take a little bit heavier than games 40 and 50. Now, do I think that, every team, their first 10 games is going to consistently play the same way? Absolutely not. So really, like you talked about, you have to really dive into it a little bit more and figure out, is this team for real? Are they, just a joke, or did they just get lucky, right? So you have to make that determination. And so, for the Red Wings anyways, I think I have to kind of lean towards they're kind of right in the middle, a little bit of luck. They're not necessarily, I don't believe they're going to be this, play 6-3-1 for every set of 10 games to the rest of the season. I think they came out like a lot of teams do. And, we've seen the past, for example, Buffalo, right? They typically in the past come out scorching hot, and then they fizzle off and end up missing the playoffs, right? Well, they're kind of doing the opposite this year. But I think for the Red Wings, they're kind of having one of those seasons where I think they're just coming out hot. Nobody had, high expectations when we talk about Ottawa, Buffalo, and Detroit. Everybody had them as far as like, the bottom team out of those three as far as like, potential bubble playoff teams. And
almost like it was Montreal, which we'll get to next. And then it was those 3 teams, like sort of in any order, but Detroit was definitely seen as the team that was a year or 2 behind where Buffalo and Ottawa were sitting.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, again, I think maybe, Detroit came out with a little chip on their shoulder, something to prove kind of thing. And, let's face it, their power play, I remember, through the first 6 or 7 games was clicking at, 40+%. It was just ridiculous. And now they've kind of come back down to earth their last 3 games a little bit.
They're at 32% now.
Yeah, and Alex DeBrincat, man, those first 8 games, he had 13 points, hasn't really done much the last couple games. And I think, point per game player is pretty close to what I expected DeBrincat and Larkin to be at. And I think, maybe playing a little bit above where I think they will finish at the end of the season in terms of points per game. But I think ultimately these are point per game players. And, the difference between Detroit this year and Detroit of years past, where we've been talking about them taking that next step, is now they're finally getting that depth scoring, right? You look at a guy like Daniel Sprong, for example, 7 points through 10 games. Joe Veleno, a 4th line centerman who's putting up 5 goals
first round
through
pick.
10 games.
First round pick.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was their second. He was their second first round pick the year that they took Moritz Seider.
Yeah,
he kind of got lost there for a minute.
Yeah, I mean he's been kind of he was slow to develop. Let's just put it that way. I don't think he developed as quickly.
Wasn't he like 22? Oh, he's 24.
23.
He's 24 actually.
24. Yeah. Yeah, I think it was the last of the Ken Holland era. He and Michael Rasmussen. So really, and again, you look at the addition of Shane Gostisbehere. He's been a power play monster out there with 6 points on the power play through 10 games. So he's added a lot of offensive punch that the Red Wings had missed in the last couple of years, where they were just getting it, last two seasons from Mo Seider. So now they've got a legit, second defenseman who can add that offensive punch. And, again, the Ghost isn't someone they're going to rely on to play those heavy defensive minutes, but he'll be out there, PP1 with Mo Seider on that blue line there.
Yeah, I was wrong. I'm sorry, I was wrong. He was not taking the same year as Moritz Seider. He was taking the same year as Philip Zadina.
Zadina, yeah.
I was like, I know it was somewhere around the 5th pick. Zadina was the 6th pick. Joe Veleno was the 30th pick in the draft that year. That was Vegas's pick, I think. That was from the trade for Thomas Tatar.
It was. That
right.
is well said.
So Thomas, hey, anytime. And I know a fourth line center is not exactly where you want a first round pick to end up, but hey, he's filling a role right now, and I think given his success thus far, he's on pace for 40 goals. Granted, he's shooting 38.5%, so that's not going to continue. He's only taken 13 shots. He's scored 5 of them. That is not going to continue. But he's plus in the face-off circle, and he has 52.5% in the face-off circle. That's a good thing too. That's what you want to see from your fourth line guys. You want to see dedication to those little small parts of the game. That is what is going to get you into the game more often as a depth centerman, is somebody who can win some face-offs. I'll say this about the Wings and the difference between this year and last year. You've got the guys who've been there before. Like Kopp was there last year, Perron was there last year, Raymond. These guys were there last year, but they're playing much better. I think they're actually slotted into the proper places throughout the lineup, whereas last year they were relying much more heavily on them. This year it's more appropriate. They're playing second, third line minutes, and they're playing exactly where they should be, and that's huge. I think JT Compher, Yzerman got a lot of crap for that signing. He's turning out to, it's almost like he came in and allowed everybody else to kind of slot where they should be, because and he can go all over the place. He can play center, he can play wing. I think right now he's been playing mostly center. He's been taking a lot of the draws. He's been taking a lot of the draws, but yeah, it just and again, that's like Andrew Kopp can play center. Andrew Kopp's also taken almost as many draws as Compher. They're basically kind of just taking draws on their strong side for the most part, I think. But they've just been put in a great position, and Yzerman has done something that a lot of people, they go, oh no, don't sign veterans when you're in the middle of a rebuild. But so far, let's go Kopp, Compher, Sprong, DeBrincat. Not that like DeBrincat's super old or anything, but he's been in the league 8 years, believe it or not. He has brought in the right mix of veterans, and this year is working out. Last year, not so much, but I think that probably is a credit to DeBrincat. DeBrincat has really changed this entire lineup because he's so dangerous, and now everybody gets to play against lesser opponents, and that is exactly what the Wings needed.
Yeah, and the difference is too is they're scoring both 5-on-5 and the power play, right? In years past, it was typically one or the other, right? It wasn't like the Wings. Traditionally the Wings just haven't really been a good 5-on-5 team in recent years. So being able to get that, now like for example, I look at David Perron. He's one guy I think I'd like to see pick it up. He's only got 1 5-on-5 point so far this season, but the other thing we forget too is we've got Robbie Fabry, who is expected to be a legitimate middle six threat. He's only played one game, scored one goal, so he's been practicing with the team and slated to come back here pretty soon. So, hopefully if he does, and I know he'll probably end up missing the next 2 games, but if he comes back sooner rather than later, that's a huge addition for a team that the more depth is only going to be good for this team.
Yeah, I will say this for Detroit, and this is sort of goes along with the Joe Veleno conversation. He's shooting 38%. The Wings as a team are shooting 12.9%. That's very high. The league average is hovering just below 10% right now, so they're 3% over the rest of the league average. Their PDO 102.7. That tends to not be sustainable throughout the whole entire year. However, we have seen some teams that are able to kind of buck that, and the reason that their shooting percentage is so high is because they're taking they're not just throwing shots at the net. We've seen the St. Louis Blues be that team many years and throughout the last 5-6 years, where they just go, we're not throwing pucks at the net, we're going to hold it and we're going to wait for an actual good opportunity. They've got it down to a science. I think that Derek Lalonde has definitely worked some of that into the pie. I think that it's when you watch what they're doing offensively, especially on the power play, there's a lot more intentionality with what they're doing with the puck this year compared to what they did last year. And I think that that's the reason why, probably the shooting percentage is a lot higher. Also, DeBrincat's shooting percentage is real high, 28.1% on those 9 goals. I don't think anybody expected DeBrincat to score like 80 goals this year, so that's okay. It'll slightly average out. But I think that's worth noting. Their shooting percentage is high. That could come back down, but they also are doing a really good job at holding on to the puck and waiting for good opportunities. So there's a positive and a negative there. But I think that for the most part, what the Red Wings are doing is pretty sustainable from a goaltending perspective and a defensive perspective, because they are, their goalies aren't playing incredible by any means. They're just playing average. For the most part, I'd say that Husso and Reimer have been right on the money. Reimer's been .939 save percentage, which is just crazy. But Husso 900 save percentage. It's not like he's been playing phenomenal, but the Wings have been able to outscore their opponents. And if you told me the way that the Wings would win would be outscoring their opponents, I would have said they're definitely not going to make the playoffs then. So I think that they'll find a way, which they do defend in their own zone really well. Really well. That's the Justin Hall, Mata, Sherratt, and Jeff Petrie. That's these guys that are really good in their own zone. And then you're letting Maurice Sider, you're letting Jeff Petrie to some extent to although he's only played 6 games, but to move the puck out of the zone. And while they're not good at all off the rush, I lost the number. I can't remember where I saw it, but the goals off the rush are real bad for Detroit. Like, the rush in is just not looking great. If they can figure that out, they might make the playoffs, which is and by might make the playoffs, I mean they'll be 2 or 3 in this division the way they're playing right now. I think that the Red Wings have a real good chance at being that one team where everybody goes, holy crap, wow, they ended up being really good. They could be last year's Seattle Kraken the way they're playing. And I guess that's the Daniel Sprong effect.
Well, in all fairness, right, you look at the teams at the bottom of this division, Buffalo, Florida, and Ottawa. I'm still waiting for them to put it together. And yes, I know it's only 8 or 10 games in for most of these clubs, but at this point, you got to wonder, are they ever going to get it together? Now, Florida, they've dealt with a bunch of injuries. Yeah. They're getting guys back. So,
Florida has actually exceeded my expectations for how.
Oh, exceeded.
Well, if you remember, I had them finishing last in the division.
I do remember you having them towards the bottom
because of all these injuries. I just tanked them. I thought Montreal would do better than people expected, which they are. I did not have them third in the division though, but
I don't think anybody did. So
right. Yeah, it's been it's been rough, but at the same time, you look at it and you go, I mean, Buffalo wins a few games in a row, and they're right there. Detroit loses a few games in a row, they're right there. And that's the danger of early in the season. This can all fall apart really easily. But I really like what I see from the Red Wings so far. And one thing to note, they aren't going out there and actually, like the games that they've lost, who have they lost to? They've lost to New Jersey. They lost to Winnipeg. I don't have their schedule up. I'm trying to pull it up, but my computer's going slow. They've lost to teams that are in the playoffs, but they are beating all the teams that are outside the playoffs. That's not a bad place to be. I mean, they're beating who they should beat, and that's really what you want right now. I mean, that's a place where you can work from. You know, if you were going out there and you're like kind of catching some of these good teams off guard, and then you still can't beat the bad teams, that usually means you're just catching good teams on a night where they go, this team freaking sucks, and they just lay a donut. But the teams that they're losing to, the Devils, the Kraken, that was in overtime, the Jets, the Bruins, like I think when you go New Jersey, Boston, Winnipeg, you'd probably go, well, Detroit will probably lose those games. But Detroit has held their own against everybody else, and that's a testament, I think, to their coaching staff, too. They've had these boys ready to start the season.
Exactly.
Anything else? Any other thoughts about what's going on with
I will say, you touched on it a little bit, right? The goaltending, and I got to say, I haven't really been, the first few games, Husso, when he looked kind of pedestrian, I figured, okay, I wouldn't really blame him, but as the season's gone on, he just hasn't really looked that good to me. I do think he's capable of a little bit better, and I don't think it has anything to do with the team in front of him, besides those off-the-rush kind of plays. But I think if things tighten up a little bit more, I think Husso is more than capable of bouncing back a little bit. And I think with James Reimer ultimately probably going to get a few more starts, and maybe his numbers come down a little bit, I think that'll balance out. But I think ultimately, that might win Detroit a few more games.
Hey, yeah, I mean, at this stage, you go, well, just play that hot hand, because James Reimer is rolling right now.
Yep, proving them doubters wrong.
That's right. Well, let's stick in the division, because the team right behind the Red Wings, don't look now, is the Montreal Canadiens, who have surprised everybody. Probably, this is, out of all these teams, probably the most surprising of the four, I would say, to have this kind of start, because they were bad last year. Cole Caulfield's kind of picked right up where he left off, on pace for another 40-goal season. But I just don't think that we thought this team had the depth or the talent defensively or up front to really do much damage in this division. And thus far, they are proving the doubters wrong. So, what do you think about the Habs start?
Well, I'll tell you what. Montembeault and Jake Allen have looked really, really good. And when you're getting, consistent goaltending from both, your 1A and your 1B, and they're putting up good numbers. It's hard not to win games. And not only that, but they're getting their top guys to produce. Teams at the top, their top guys are always producing, right? And that's key to any team's success. But they're also getting a little bit of depth scoring, not as good as maybe the last team, Detroit, we talked about, right? Brandon Gallagher, only 3 points through 9 games. But, I think they're getting guys to chip in here or there and, do enough, to really keep this team relevant and in games. And so. Well,
Tanner Pearson's been a great scoop up for them.
Yeah, not bad. 5 points through 9 games. You got to, maybe shake your head at Alex Newhook. Those first 3 games, 3 goals, but now through the last, 6, only 1 assist. But, again, there's time, and a lot of these guys will find their rhythm, right? When you bring in new guys, it's typically what happens. And, I'll say it sucks losing Kirby Dach. That was a big blow, but they've exceeded my expectations tremendously. Because, again, I had them at the bottom of this division, considering all the, the teams in front of them and what talent they had. But, man, they're playing a more complete team game. Maybe if they can pick it up a little bit better in the face-off circle, I think they would be they'd be doing okay. Well,
who called Sean Monahan being a 60-point guy this year?
Oh, I absolutely. Well, last year I figured he was going to be a 60-point guy, and he disappointed me. But
did you? He hasn't had 60 points since 18-19.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of pegged him to be that 60-point pace kind of guy. And, I mean, yeah, he, didn't do it with the Flames, but I thought, okay, great, he's going to Montreal. And I figured he was going to
He had a decent start. He had a decent start. He probably would have ended up with 45 or 50 points last year had he not gotten hurt. But, yeah, he's off to a torrid start. I mean, really, probably the reason that Montreal is winning the games that they are is because they're getting fantastic second-line center depth from Sean Monahan, which is something they really couldn't find last year. And that's why they are where they are. I would say that their save percentage is considerably higher than the rest of the league, almost a 1.5% difference from the average. So do I think that Montembeault and Jake Allen are going to be able to sustain that high save percentage? I don't know. And in this case, Montreal does not seem like the team that is going to be able to outscore too many teams. I know they've put up some good numbers throughout these games, but I think over the course of a regular season, as things tighten up, it's probably less likely that this team is the one who's outscoring other teams. That's going to be an issue if they can't keep the puck out of the net. But hey, so far, I mean, you look, they've got kind of wins against garbage teams for the most part. Chicago, Washington, Columbus, Winnipeg are their and Buffalo are their 5 wins. So, but they're finding their way into shootout situations, into overtime situations, and so they're setting themselves up to grab a point. Those points in the end, they've gone the extra frame 5 times already in the first 10 games. So those extra points in the first 9 games, those extra points will make a big difference.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? You got to win those games that again against those lesser teams, right? Those Columbuses and to start the season, Buffalo, right? I mean Chicago. You have to win those games if you want to be successful in this league. And I mean I always having been a Tigers fan, Detroit Tigers baseball fan for so long, they always had a problem beating the crappy teams, right? And so that they just always found themselves outside the playoff picture because of that. And so when you're a team like Montreal and you're trying to take that next step and push a little bit and make a little bit of noise, you have to make sure that you're beating those teams that are at the bottom of the league, because you're going to come up against these New Jerseys, the Torontos, and let's face it, you're not going to get points out of that. So take the points where you can to stay relevant, and at least give the players you have now that taste of success, because they're only going to want it more the more and more they get it.
Yep, absolutely. And hey, if you pick up enough points in those games where you're playing teams where you have no business beating them, you can scoop up a point. That can make a difference in the end. You don't know what position you'll be in. This league is crazy and things can change on a dime. I will say this. If you said, hey, Montreal's going to start the season, they'll be in 3rd after 10 games, I go, okay, wow, they must have had a good start. So Josh Anderson and probably Slavkovsky, probably things have worked out pretty well with them. No, 2 assists between the two of them in 18 games. Then not a goal, and we're not talking it's not like Slavkovsky is only playing 8 minutes a game. I mean, he's playing over 14 minutes a game. Josh Anderson's at almost 17 minutes a game. He has 1 point. I mean, they've had some guys step up, and I'll say on the side of the difference maker, it's Mike Matheson. I mean, we did not see this Mike Matheson last year for the Montreal Canadiens. We did not see he's sort of evolved this season, at least in the first 10 games, into a defenseman who is a true top pairing defenseman. I don't know that I'm willing to say, hey, he's a number 1 defenseman by any means, but look at he's got 6 points through 9 games, and I think his career high is 34 points, was what he had last year. I know he was buzzing last year a little bit before he got hurt. He only played 48 games, but he is only in the offensive zone for faceoffs 33% of the time. He's barely in the offensive zone, and he's still picking up these points, which is very, very impressive at this stage of the season. Only 3 of those are on the power play too. So 3-5 on 5 points. I think that he's been a big difference maker, and if Montreal, I mean, how can they keep doing this? That's kind of what I'm asking myself. Like, how's this going to keep going? I guess this is truly the evolution of Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki. I think that's where really it all starts at the top. And if these guys can stay healthy, which hasn't always been the case, this could be a much different season than we expected. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but do I think that they could kind of be that? Maybe the sixth, maybe be in the playoff conversation for like in and around the trade deadline. I mean, that wouldn't be a bad place for Montreal to be. I mean, they can still deal Tanner Pearson if they want. They could still deal Sean Monahan if they want. But they don't have a lot of UFAs or like super valuable guys. Like, what are you going to get for Monahan or Pearson? Maybe a third-round pick. So,
centerman, Monahan? Oh, they could probably get a second and probably a good prospect.
Yeah, maybe a second.
Yeah.
But, But it is you look at it and go, well, he's worth hanging on to. Like, he's worth just keeping in this organization, re-sign him, and let's continue building on what we're building because things are going well. I mean, you would think that Sean Monahan is 35 years old, the way that he kind of, I'll say, like, aged out of Calgary, but didn't it feel like he was just old when he left Calgary? Like, well, I guess his nice career, he had 82 points in 18-19, and I guess it kind of felt like, well, maybe he just, the way he played just was too much for his body, but he's still a very good player, and he's only 29 years old. It's not like he can't sign a 3 or 4 year deal and maybe stretch this into something.
Yeah, you need those veteran guys, and I will add too, I don't think for Montreal this is very sustainable. And the big reason why, I'm just looking at some of the numbers here, the advanced stats, and I look at shots on goal against, and they are 5th in the league as far as shots on goal, the most shots on goal against at 317. Obviously, teams at the bottom like San Jose and Anaheim, Seattle are up there above them, but being
what do you
that
mean
high,
teams at the bottom? Anaheim's our next team.
Well, I mean, at the bottom of this list, okay. I'll say that.
I got you.
Right. So, and then they're 20th in, as far as shots on goal for. So, when they're not putting a lot of pucks on net, but they're having a lot of shots on net. Looking at some of Jake Allen's, career numbers here. I mean,
that's why he's been so good for my fantasy team.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. When you're counting saves for points, that's just, I mean, you got to be, salivating at that one. But, I do think we're going to probably see a few more pucks slip in as time goes on, just because, again, his save percentage and goals against numbers have always been statistically a lot worse than where they are now. And I don't foresee this being sustainable in the long run. Now, again, it won't be as terrible as I think the last few years in Montreal have, but again, I don't think he can sustain this kind of success in the long term.
Yeah. I think that if these 9 games occur in January, we go, oh, cool, Montreal's on a nice little stretch. That's nice. They've got nothing to play for, so it's easy. That's kind of, but even in these first 9 games, that's kind of ultimately where I land, is that, like, no one has any expectation for this team to make the playoffs. So yeah, they're coming out nice and loose. They've taken advantage of some teams that maybe have had more on their plate, and they've won. They have some nice high-end players on their team, and they've gotten timely goaltending in these 9 games. But it's 9 games, and I think the Red Wings are different because there was pressure. Like, there's a ton of pressure on Larkin and DeBrincat to deliver something. Like, get us close. I mean, at this point, you've missed for Larkin, he's got to be like, I missed the playoffs so many years in a row. Whereas for Montreal, this rebuild really has just begun a couple of years ago. So I think 2 very different situations, and in this case, Montreal just off to a nice start because there's no pressure. And once they start to go, damn, look at us, that's where this all starts to crumble. Because you're right, Jake Allen's not going to end up winning the Vezina, and they're not going to be able to. I mean, they're 5-2-2, and they've been outscored 28-30. That is not sustainable in any way, and so I agree. Montreal will fall off, but it's a nice little start for them. It's nice to see what they could be eventually.
Absolutely.
Should we go to the Vancouver Canucks?
Let's do it.
Opposite side of the pond. The Vancouver Canucks currently are, I mean, man, they are the definition of like, our top players were not our top players last year, and this year they are. And things have been drastically different for the Vancouver Canucks coming into this year. Have you gotten a chance to watch much of Vancouver this season so far?
I'll admit it's been very minimal.
Yeah, it's hard to watch the West Coast teams.
Yeah, for sure.
But what I have seen is, Elias Pettersson has been on a whole nother level than where he has been in the past. Obviously, 16 points in 9 games. He's been fantastic. JT Miller, this is, JT Miller 2 years ago he scored a ton. He had 99 points. And last year, things really fell apart for JT Miller. He was, there was just it was like he was being ridiculed for being terrible defensively. And I think he took note. It's very clear he took note, because I'm seeing a totally different JT Miller, a guy who is actually at least attempting to find his way back into the defensive zone and defend. I think that Rick Tocchet is the reason that this is happening. Like, sure, these guys have to show up. They got to play the right way, yada, yada. But, man, it is pretty apparent since he took over that this team is completely changed, and I think that's all credit to him. And boy, I'll say thank goodness they didn't trade Brock Besser last year.
Dude, yeah.
I know that, hey, he had 4 goals in the first 9 game, or the first game of the season, and he's only had 2 in the last 8. But that's okay. If Brock Besser scores you 20 goals, you're pretty, I think at this point where things have kind of gone with him, I don't know that he's a 30-goal scorer anymore, but I think if he can have 20 and 20, he ends up with 40 points. Is that so bad for Brock Besser? I guess he had 55 points last year. But if he's actually playing responsibly defensively as well, and you're getting a better player, maybe putting up 50 points, and isn't quite as flashy, I think you're okay with that. He also never gets penalties, so that always helps.
Yeah, I think he and JT Miller have formed a nice little. They've clicked very, very well on that second line, and what's great, you mentioned it, right? JT Miller and Elias Pettersson are just playing otherworldly right now, which is just fantastic. Look, Elias Pettersson's in a contract year. I knew the numbers were going to be ridiculous again, because this guy wants to get paid, right? He wants to get over that $10 million mark, and I think right now he's showing that he's worth every penny. And if I'm Vancouver, I'm trying to sign this guy as quick as possible, because as the season goes on, and if he's sitting there at the end of the year with 120 plus points, man, he's going to cost you, $12 million bucks.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
It's going to be tough to get him close to 10 mil at that point. So, again, I say this, almost every other show, but I don't like to read it into plus minus too much. But when you only have 2 guys on your whole entire team that are a minus in terms of plus minus, and they're bottom line guys, that's something to admire, right? You've got Pius Sutter at a -2 and Noah Jolson at a -1. These are guys that play on your third and fourth line, bottom pairing defensemen. Noah Jolson's only played 3 games, so it's great to see, because everybody is being responsible, and when you look at numbers for guys at the top 2 of being responsible, like JT Miller, Brock Besser, Kuzmenko, they have a nice balance of 5-on-5 and power play points, so they're not doing it just in one area or the other. They're destroying everybody in all areas of the game right now. Yeah,
I was going to ask you, you expect Pius Suter to be doing a little better based off what you saw in Detroit the last 2 years?
I think with any kind of, change in scenery, right, it does take a little bit of time. And I think he's a very good offensive player. He knows how to, he knows how to win draws. He's been doing very well at that at 55%. So I think as long as he's winning draws, I think, over the next, couple months, he'll eventually figure out how to fit in this system and do what he does best. I don't expect him to put up 30 or 40 points, but if you can get 25 points out of this guy and you can get him to, win you draws on that bottom line there, that's all you got to ask for maybe out of a guy like this. Now, Maybe at some point they look to, change up where he slots in this team, maybe on the third or fourth line, maybe move some of his wingers around. But, I eventually figure he'll settle in at some point and get settled in. I mean, look, he's playing on the second power play unit. I figured he probably had gotten a couple points by now, but who knows? Again, like I said, maybe it takes some guys just a little bit longer to get settled in than maybe others.
Yeah, I will say this: Vancouver is 4-1 since Ilya Mikheyev came back from injury. He didn't start the year with the team. He's had a point in 4 of those 5 games. The only game he did not have a point, they lost in OT. I'm sorry, they're 4-0-1, not 4-1. 4-0-1. So I mean, you look at, that's still, so they were 1-2 without him, and they're 4-0-1 with him. So a very important piece, Ilya Mikheyev. I mean, he fills out that top 6. And he just is, he's that kind of player that there just aren't very many of them out there. Like, the guy is just, he can kill penalties, he can score goals. He's usually if you get a really good penalty killer, like, that's what he does. He's a good penalty killer, and yeah, he might chip in here and there, but he'll put up some apples. But he's somebody who's a good penalty killer and he can score. That's a very rare combination of 2 things that he's good at. So I think Mikheyev, it's why he got a big contract from Vancouver. And I think, that first year in Vancouver was rough, only 28 points, but he got hurt, the coaching situation, and I think, 4 points in 5 games. Maybe he puts up a 50-point season here, which would be huge for Vancouver. And all that to be said, I mean, you look across this, if their offensive players keep going the way that they're going. I mean, Philip Hronek has been a huge part of their offense so far. Even Tyler Myers looks okay.
Well, and that's what they were missing last year, right? They weren't getting any, besides Quinn Hughes, they weren't getting any offense on defense. And Philip Hronek he's made it easier, like you mentioned before, with, in Detroit with JT Compher, guys slot down where they fit best. And now Tyler Myers is slotting down where he fits best on that bottom pair. He doesn't have to worry about, contributing offensively. He can focus on defense, and it's led to more offense because of that.
Yep. And, everything aside, Thatcher Demko has been phenomenal. A .935 save percentage, 1.92 goals against. He has been very, very good. A 4.9 in the goals saved above average over 6 games. I mean, that's almost a goal every game that he's saving above average. He's been fantastic for Vancouver, and I think we said this at the beginning of the season, that if Thatcher Demko is who he was 2 years ago, this team has every opportunity to make the playoffs because of how open the Pacific Division is. And Suddenly, you look at the Pacific Division and you go, well, of course, yeah, Vegas, Los Angeles is there, but then it's Vancouver in second, Anaheim fourth, and like the Oilers and the Flames are so far back already. They're already 7 points out of the playoffs. What's happening? Oh, well, 7 points out of behind those teams in their division. I suppose as far as the playoffs go, they're actually 4 points out of the playoffs because Arizona holds down the final wild card spot in the Western Conference, which I'm sure will change. But hey, they're in a bad spot. Like you were saying it, you can't necessarily play yourself into the playoffs, but you can certainly play yourself out of it. And they are playing terribly. Like, the way that they're losing is just bad. But anyways, we're not here to talk about the Oilers, but it's just, this division looks more wide open than I think we ever thought it would. It was.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at 4 of their next 5 games, this will really show me what Vancouver really is because, they've got an easy one tonight against San Jose. I think they'll probably put up a 5 spot on that one. But, after that, they're going to Dallas. They're going to Edmonton, who needs to bounce back, and they're trying to win some games. But then you've also got Ottawa, who's hungry. They just fired their GM. So, it's a little warm in Ottawa. Let's just put it that way. And then you've got to go to Toronto. So I think they'll have some good tests coming up in those next 4 games there. That'll really show me if this Ottawa team's for real or if they're just a phony.
Ottawa or Vancouver?
I'm sorry, yeah, Vancouver.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, did we switch talking about teams and I didn't know? Yes. And I mean, hey, Vancouver at this stage, if Thatcher Demko is going, they can beat anybody. like, not saying they could beat anybody in a 7-game series, but they can beat anybody on any given night. The way that this top 6 forward group's playing, they're playing very well. They're hard to contain, and Quinn Hughes is probably at this stage in your top 3 for the Norris for sure. And if Vancouver keeps on winning the way that they are, I think he's probably more of a lock for the Norris than anyone else, because people are going to look at him and go, look, he's carrying this team that couldn't even make the playoffs last year. And the way that he's going, I mean, he could end up with 100 points.
Ooh,
could he do it?
Ooh.
Could he do it? He's at 11 right now in 9 games. So that would be, I guess that would be about 80. What? That would be, it would be like 96 or so, 97 on pace for.
That's bold. 100 points. Okay.
Could he get there? Probably not, but it'd be kind of fun. All right. Should we close this one out with the Ducks before we go into some coaching hot seat?
Yeah, quack.
All right. The Anaheim Ducks. I mean, shoot, what can you say? I mean, here's the thing that sucks for the Ducks. They have started the season so well, and they are still 4th in the division because the teams ahead of them have just played so well. I mean, obviously the aforementioned Vancouver Canucks ahead of them, as are the LA Kings and the Vegas Golden Knights, who are 6 points ahead of the Canucks for the division lead. They are basically running away with, well, frankly, the league, but other than Boston over there. But Anaheim 6-4. They have been kind of all over the place in terms of, they're winning some games because of goaltending. They're winning some games because of their offense. Troy Terry looks phenomenal thus far. What do you think of the way that the Ducks have come out here? Because we expected them to be maybe just above San Jose in this division.
Yeah.
I don't remember where you had them, but
yeah, so I had them actually at the bottom of this division.
Okay,
they've well exceeded. I actually had them below San Jose because I thought, again, they just don't have an identity, right? So they, they were still trying to figure out what kind of system they were going to play. They had new head coach coming in here with Greg Cronin, and coming off statistically one of the worst defensive seasons in NHL history. I didn't have high hopes for them, but clearly they listened to our podcast and said, well, fuck these guys. We're going to go out and prove them wrong. Or at least Lucas Dostal has done that.
Yes. And Frank Vetrano, who just is scoring hat tricks every other night.
Yeah, I don't understand it. It boggles my mind. But so here's the thing, though. I look at this team, and I'm looking at their schedule here, and they lost 4 out of their first 5 games, but now they won 5 in a row. And when you go back to those first 5 games, they were really, they weren't playing Leo Carlsson every night. They were bringing him every couple games. And so now they're getting back to, bringing him in full time now, because I think they kind of figured, well, shit, this guy can actually play. We don't have to worry about sheltering him a little bit and having him watch from the press box. He knows what he's doing. And I think he's fitting very, very well with Zegras and Troy Terry on that top line. And you got to think, if he had been there for every game in those first 5 games, maybe they squeak out 1, maybe, 2.5 wins out of that instead of 4 losses. I don't know. Get a couple extra points, and now you're sitting, closer to that, the top of that division with Vancouver there maybe instead. And so, they could be really dangerous, because now with, Lucas or Leo Carlsson there and Mason McTavish just, slotted in perfectly, where I think they fit so well. I just think they've got a really good, well-oiled top 6 that they seem to all be clicking very, very well. And I think now you give guys like Adam Henrique and Max Jones, you take the pressure off them a little bit, let them do their thing in that third line bottom 6 there. And I think it's just been paying off very, very well. And the addition on that back end, playing a guy like, Pavel, gosh, I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, Mintyukov.
Sure.
Is that how you say it? Yeah, I've watched him a couple of games, and I have him on my fantasy squad, and he looks not out of place at all for a 20-year-old kid right now. Or a 19-year-old kid. He just has come in and just, has picked up the game very, very well, and just is giving them a little bit more firepower defensively than I think they were expecting.
Well, and you bring in somebody like Radko Gudas, and you look at what he does to the teams that he plays for. He just gives guys a little more confidence to go out there and do what they do. So I think that's an important note that he's just somebody who can, he changes what you have to do when you're out there on the ice, first off. So for the other team, you're suddenly looking over your shoulder. But I think that it's kind of released some of these guys to be who they are. I will say I wouldn't have expected that the Anaheim Ducks would be in the playoff chase and Trevor Zegras having 2 points in 10 games. He's been quite bad, and he's been visibly frustrated in some of these games. It is, 28 shots through 10 games. For a guy like Zegras, that it seems low to me. It just doesn't seem like he's shooting the puck enough. So I think that there's maybe some issues going on there. But I think sometimes these things just have to work themselves out. But other I just wonder what's going on. There was the contract stuff that was happening with him. Did that affect him? Was it missing camp? Like a little bit of camp that he missed? I mean, anything's possible for these younger kids, but I mean, he's been very consistent. Been a very consistent 60-plus point guy, and you come out here and you've got 1 goal through 10 games. That is not good. So, I mean, you can look at it 2 ways. Hey, this is not good that he's struggling, but also the rest of the team's going. So if he could just get going, imagine what we've got too. So you tack on a fully engaged Trevor Zegras and Leo Carlsson coming in every night, or playing more often at least. I think that Anaheim has a real shot. They are at least loaded up with enough veterans to where you could go, I mean, this team could make a little bit of a push, but I think ultimately, you look at their defense. I still don't think that this is a defense core that can make the playoffs. But hey, they're playing well so far, and I just think once Edmonton gets going, and I mean, I guess I say that with relative confidence that they will get going at some point. I think those are games that it'll be tough for Anaheim to win. I think Calgary will get going. Not necessarily that they're going to be world beaters, but Calgary, Edmonton, Seattle, you got to think they're going to be a little bit better than what they've been so far. And I think that Anaheim would be the team that would get chased down pretty quickly out of all 4 of those teams. So I don't expect Anaheim to sit here, but it is fun. I hope that they kind of keep pushing this and that they can stay in the race, because I do want to see 4 teams make the playoffs from both conferences. And I think that when you have a lot of good teams in a division, I think that that's usually what happens is if you've got one division that has a bunch of bad teams, that's where you only get 3 from that division. So I would like to see it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, if Anaheim can stay relatively close to the playoff picture, 4 months from now, they're probably going to get, Jamie Drysdale back, and that would be a nice little trade deadline boost for them.
Yeah,
so.
For sure. Yeah, because they're not going out and they're not dealing anything. So
right.
I think as far as Pat Verbeek is concerned, their general manager, I think he might be looking at this like, guys, we were hoping to have another first overall pick here, like another lottery pick here. You guys are so maybe this is where you see Dostal will just get dealt. No, 23 years old, he's not getting dealt. But
no, and I even think even if they are in the bubble or pretty close to it, the playoff picture, I still think you have to deal Adam Henrique or maybe Jacob Silfverberg, get what you can. Because again, I don't think these guys are part of the long-term plan in Anaheim. So,
although Adam Henrique has been there for quite some time, I wonder if he's willing to just re-up. And
he is, but I think you do him. I think he's going to want to go after. Because I do think it's a couple years before they're a legit Stanley Cup contender, assuming that, everybody develops as is. And so, he might want to chase a Stanley Cup sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And let's not forget, Alex Killorn has been hurt as well. So he's on the IR for a month. He should be coming back in 2 weeks or so. So
yeah, he's one of those guys too that I think, he helps guys like, I think Trevor Zegras, when they are having these slumps
True.
where they aren't figuring out, he's one of those guys that'll come in and help you kind of figure out how to deal with that.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, Anaheim's in an interesting position. When you're a team like Montreal too, when you're a team with no expectations, it's a lot easier to to just kind of hum along early on. And I think these things usually figure themselves out. Their PDO is a little higher. Their save percentage is almost a percentage higher than the rest of the league. Their shooting percentage is 2% higher. So usually those things will balance their way out, and they will, 76% on the PK too. That's no good.
Right.
They are not a good special teams team, and generally over time that is going to come back to bite you. But tell that to the St. Louis Blues a few years ago. But
geez. Speaking of St. Louis, I don't know if you've seen their power play, but it's 4%. So.
Oh wow, yeah, that's bad. That's really terrible. Let's allow that to take us into a new conversation of a few guys that we think are on the hot seat, because that's probably a good place to start with Craig Berube, who has once again having another poor start, and surprisingly enough, maybe other than Jordan Binnington, no one is playing all that well.
Yeah.
No one has more than 2 goals. That's Brendan Saad and Robert Thomas have 2 goals through the first 8 games.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, you mentioned one name in there, Robert Thomas, right? I think if St. Louis could, take back that contract, they might do that, him and Jordan Kyrou, but they're stuck with it. So, head coaches, right? They're easier to fire than it is to try to figure out, to trade a guy with a contract like that. So
he's got to go. It's not happening. I mean, yeah, I know he coached them to a Stanley Cup, but since they won that Stanley Cup, really like the last 2 years, it's been pretty apparent that things aren't going super well. They just can't score. All they can do is 5-on-5. They're terrible special teams, and this year their penalty kill's bad. So it's time to see if you can figure this out with someone else, because you look at this team and it's not a team that's ready to rebuild the way that they've brought guys in and signed guys long term. So I think you got to try and fire your coach and see if they can switch things around. I mean, Torrey Krug, 0 points through 8 games. Justin Falk, 1 assist. Colton Parayko, a goal. Like, no one is scoring. And if you showed me, don't even show me how many points, how many goals anybody scored. You just show me the order at which these players are on the scoring list for the Blues. You go Robert Thomas and Kasperi Kapanen's number 2. If I looked at that, I'd probably say, well, St. Louis is probably having a brutal start, then, aren't they? If Kasperi Kapanen, a guy who nobody even wanted to pick up on waivers, is your second highest scoring, you're probably having trouble. So I think the Blues, Berube's got to go. I would be surprised if he lasts till Thanksgiving, to be honest.
Wow. Okay. It wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, he's, if I had to list the top 3 coaches on the hot seat, he would probably be right up there in that top 3 somewhere. So,
I mean, are we looking, obviously with Pierre Dorion being fired, that's a pretty obvious one.
Yes.
But I wonder if they just wait. DJ Smith's been there a while, but he's kind of always had an iffy team. Do you wait and see if he can turn it around, or are you going to go fire the GM and fire the coach and then just let Steve Staios, who took over as interim GM, hire a coach?
Well, you know what? I think it's, for a GM, if you want to bring in your guy, right, which a lot of GMs tend to do, at some point, right, during their tenure. Most of them don't do it right away, though. So it's easier to find a guy that you want during the offseason than it is mid-season. So, again, it depends how much you really believe in what you have, So a lot of teams, if they're firing a GM, they're firing a head coach, it's usually because they're at the bottom of the league. They're probably, looking at a possible rebuild, or, they have way too many issues to just overcome, right? Where just a simple fix of, switching out a head coach, right, might do it. So, for a team like Ottawa, I think, they've got enough good personnel on ice that maybe a head coaching change might be enough to really catapult this team into something really, really good. Now, I know. Well,
I don't disagree. Again, I'm just wondering if, do you want to let your new GM hire a coach? Do you want to hire a coach now and then have to go and say, hey, GM, we just hired a new coach, so this is the guy you're stuck with? Or
well, here's the other.
Yeah.
Well, so for me, anyways, you have a GM who's on an interim, tag right now, right? So,
right. Because he's president of hockey ops or something.
Yeah. So, how much leeway are you going to give him to make a, call like that with bringing in a new coach, right, as an owner? So I don't know what kind of, power he's given him to say, you know what, if you want to make a head coaching change, go for it. But no, maybe he wants, ownership in Ottawa says, oh no, we want you to bring in a GM first and let him decide if they want to bring in a new head coach or not.
And I think that if you're somebody who is thinking, oh, I could go and be a GM there, you're like, well, I hope they don't hire somebody because I want to hire my guy. That would be my leaning, but it also all depends, because if Steve Staios is the president of hockey ops and he also is like the GM's going to work for him, so is he just going to bring in his own guy who already is a part of the crew? Like maybe he brings in somebody that he wants to be in there who would already approve of the head coach anyways. So there's also that, and this is all new because Ottawa just new ownership. Steve Staios just started there too, so it'll be. I think that move is probably enough. Like if you fire the GM, that probably means that everybody's safe for a minute, and because otherwise you would just fire the coach. Like it makes a lot more sense if you're going to fire the coach. Just fire the coach first, and then see how this plays out, and then you fire the GM, I guess. But
but this is a little different situation, though. I think they fired that the GM because they lost that first round pick. The handling of Shane Pinto, so it's a little bit different than just a team playing bad or poorly in the standings.
I mean, they made the playoffs one time. It was his first year as the GM, and they haven't made the playoffs since. So one could argue that they made the 1 year they made the playoffs, he had very little to do with it, and then they missed the playoffs every other year he was there. And they were freaking terrible, and they dealt for Matt Duchene. They still missed the playoffs. And was he there the year that they went to the final?
Well,
no, he wasn't. They missed the playoffs.
I'll tell you what, though, these offseason moves he's made have looked really, really good. I mean, Jacob Chikrin looks phenomenal. Tarasenko looks incredible. So right now, I'm not hating the moves that he actually did. I think he's put this team in a good position. Yeah.
But I mean, over the course of 8 years.
Sure.
And everybody's going to have their stinkers. Don't get me wrong. I know that. Okay, I'd say that DJ Smith is on the hot seat, but it's a little different because we're kind of like, well, is there going to be a GM hired soon? Or like, so I'd say that one is like maybe less imminent. Whereas you look at St. Louis and you're like, St. Louis is trying to make the playoffs. They can't. They're bad again. And Craig Berube kind of is this old school guy. Maybe it's time to bring in some new school. So get him out of there, bring in somebody, even if it's on an interim basis, bring in somebody who can just kind of maybe flush this thing around a little bit and see what happens. The one other team I wonder about, I don't think that they'll fire their coach, but man, Pittsburgh is not looking good. And everybody freaking loves Mike Sullivan, but do they need a new voice? Like, it has nothing to do with him being a good or a bad coach, but do they just need a new voice in there to shake things up? And Kyle Dubas is a new GM. Does he, put his stamp on this team by firing the coach and bringing in his own guy to see if they can salvage the season?
I mean, I will say he is on the last. I mean, he just got a contract extension, so I don't know if you fire a guy mid-season having just giving him a 3-year extension that hasn't even started yet.
Yeah, it'd be tough. But you weren't expecting the season to start like this.
No, and I think for maybe this team, maybe you give it. Gosh, I don't know. I almost would probably give it the year and just see how it plays out. Now, I guess it really all depends, right? So if
it depends on what Sydney says.
Yeah, well, absolutely. That's a big thing, right? I mean, you've got Letang and Carlson, you've got Malkin, you've got Brian Rust-Raquel signed up. So if you can get Jake Gensel re-signed, right, you get that piece locked up, and you've got Crosby and Malkin locked up for another year, and Crosby will probably re-up next year again. Then you can make a decision in the offseason like, hey, we just want to cut bait now and bring in another voice, sure. But mid-season, I don't know, having just given him an extension. Now, there is another coach that I look at that just got an extension too, but I think there might be a little bit more pressure on him to produce than there would be maybe on Sullivan, and that's Jay Woodcroft at Edmonton.
Okay. Yep.
Boy, you want to talk about a team that has just kind of stunk it to start the year, and that's Edmonton. And
man, they just fired their coach, 2 years ago?
I know, but it's like
they fire their coach every 2 years.
Maybe they do, and I mean, maybe this is Kenny Holland's last hurrah. So who knows if he's going to retire after this season? But Connor McDavid is due for an extension in 2 off seasons from now. So and Leon Draisaitl next this off season. So if things really aren't going well and just look, I mean, I don't think Edmonton's going to be at the bottom of this division or anywhere near it at the end of the year. But boy, if it doesn't look like it's getting better, if you're Leon Draisaitl, do you maybe say, do I really want to be here? Do I want to go, play behind Connor McDavid's shadow the whole time for another, 7-8 years?
I think he loves playing with him.
I do too. I mean, why wouldn't you want to play with this guy? But maybe. But again, I don't know the guy, so maybe he's thinking, I want to go and be the number one guy on my team, my own team, or be on a team that like I'm that missing piece that's going to put them over the top and make them the next, like Jack Eichel was to Vegas, right? I'm going to be that piece to them.
All right, Justin, are you ready to talk about the history of the Edmonton Oilers coaches?
Let's go, baby.
So Craig McTavish is aside from Glenn Sather, is the longest tenured head coach of the Edmonton Oilers, 656 games from 2000 to 2009. After that, 2009-10, Pat Quinn was the head coach, and then he was no longer. He was only there 1 year. The next guy, Tom Rennie, he was their head coach for 2 seasons. Then you had Ralph Kruger, who was their head coach for the lockout year, 48 games. The next 1.5 seasons, Dallas Aikens, 13 to 15, but he only coached 113 games. Todd Nelson, 14-15, he took over. He coached for 51 games. And then Todd McClellan came in. He lasted a good amount of time, 266 games. So he was there for, 4 seasons. And then in 18-19, 3.5 seasons, because 18-19, Ken Hitchcock came in, was their head coach for 62 games. And then Dave Tippett from 19 to 22, 171 games. So he lasted 2.5 years. And then Jay Woodcroft, currently their head coach for the last season and a half. So this team does not sit on head coaches for very long.
No.
Not at all.
Yeah, and previous to Jay Woodcroft, I mean, since Pat Quinn in 09-10, they've only had 2 coaches with over a 500 win percentage. So, that might be part of the problem, right? I mean, Dave Tippett and McClellan were there for very long tenures, and so they were able to put together the wins. So maybe that's part of the problem, right? Maybe I'm jumping the gun here. Yeah.
Well, I think that Jay Woodcroft, though, I mean, has been good. I think we're all willing to say, well, this is just a bad stretch. They've been historically bad to start seasons. I mean, hence, look at all these coaches fired at the beginning of the season over the last 5-6 years. That's 1, 2, 3 coaches over the last 10 years have been fired in the first 20 games of the year, that's a lot. And you might do it again here, which would be surprising, I think. But I think there's one more team that I would say is maybe slightly in danger of, hey, should we fire our coach? And that'd be the Buffalo Sabres. A lot of expectation on the Sabres. They're starting 5-5. Lots of time to turn this around. I don't know that he gets fired today or even in 2 months from now, but if Don Granato can't get this team to sniff the playoffs this year, I think that he might be gone. Other than
he
that,
just got a 2-year contract extension too.
Yeah, but everybody gets 2-year contract extensions.
I know, man.
And of course, we could always talk Sheldon Keefe. This is his. I know he got an extension, but if they don't do something pretty significant in the playoffs, I would imagine he's on the hot seat. But no one's getting fired imminently, other than, in my opinion, like Craig Berube in St. Louis, and maybe in Ottawa, DJ Smith. So those would be the only 2 that I think that could be relatively soon. I think the rest of them, it's like, well, we'll wait and see.
I don't disagree with you.
All right. Well, that is our show. You can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Oh, sorry. You can find us on X. What am I saying? It's X. You can find us on X. Yeah, that's not our porn site. It's just the site we type things into and tell you about what's going on in hockey. That's what I always thought was weird about X. Why? Anyways. Yeah. Justin, I hope you have a great night. And to our listeners, enjoy the hockey, and we'll talk to you guys real soon.